Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the internet, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1389 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The FCC issues a notice of violation to an amateur for unauthorized one-way transmissions and denial of station inspection. The BBC now expects to close Radio 4 Longwave during 2026. The ARRL has launched a club newsletter contest. We will have all the details. The ARRL Foundation is now accepting applications during October. Ham radio influencers all around the internet encourage amateurs to help pass the amateur radio emergency preparedness legislation now before Congress. A newly licensed amateur receives a fine from the FCC. We will tell you how the government shutdown is affecting amateur radio testing, and the FCC. We will have the monthly volunteer monitor report this week. The United States has signed a space agreement with Australia. A U.S. judge tells the administration to halt layoffs at the Voice of America. The FCC releases a draft notice for next-gen television rules and proposes sunsetting for ATSC 1.0. And this week, we will leave you with a special look at broadcast radio history. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Ben Shop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will tell us how to properly prepare for an amateur radio outing, such as Parks on the Air. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another brand new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to 1923 to see how amateurs were investigating all sorts of things, including Aurora and even de-expeditions, as he wraps up with part 2 of the story entitled High Latitudes and Low Wavelengths. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on de-expeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio facility just outside of Albany, New York, where after emerging from the deep freeze, we're back in the 70s again, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where I just finalized the programming of my radios for the Chicago Marathon, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our studios in Naugatuck, Connecticut, where we're expecting a severe nor'easter tonight and tomorrow. We're really battening down the hatches here. I'm Steve Sawyer, K1 FRC.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from central New York, near the southern shore of Lake Ontario, where we're certainly feeling a chill in the air, this is Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from our news bureau at the Ham Shack TV studio, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our news bureau this week from station K2MST inside the Museum of Science and Technology in downtown Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where it's too cold for shorts anymore, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where pumpkins are accumulating at a frightening rate, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where summer and autumn are preparing for their annual battle, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our news this week, the Federal Communication Commission has issued a notice of violation to Mike F. Conte of Naples, Florida, citing alleged rule violations related to unauthorized transmission and refusal to allow station inspection. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more.
The FCC notice by the Regional Director, Region 1 Enforcement Bureau was released on September 29, 2025, and includes that Conte holds an amateur radio service license KA2FPZ. According to the notice, FCC Enforcement Bureau agents from the New York field office conducted an investigation on March 17, 2025. Using direction-finding techniques, they located and monitored transmissions on 7.200 megahertz emanating from a residence owned by Conte in Brookfield, Connecticut, that appeared to be one-way broadcast originating from KA2FPZ. According to the FCC, Conte was pretending to speak with a station he identified as KB2VBO, a call sign not currently licensed to any radio amateur operator. In addition to the alleged unauthorized broadcasting, the FCC reported that agents are denied and were denied access to the residence in violation of the Commission's rules. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
No station responded to the transmission Conte made, and the notice included that Conte later admitted to the agent that he was engaging in one-way communication that was neither allowed nor exempted under the rules. In addition to the alleged unauthorized broadcasting, the FCC reported that agents were denied access to the residence in violation of the Commission's rules. The notice of violations outlined two specific rule violations: 47 CFR Part 97.103 Subpart C, which states that the station's licensee must make the station and the station records available for inspection upon request by an FCC representative. 47 CFR Part 97.113 Subpart B, which states an amateur station shall not engage in any form of broadcasting, nor may an amateur station transmit one-way communications except as specifically provided in these rules. The Commission ordered Conte to respond in writing within 20 days of the notice's release, providing a detailed explanation of the circumstances, corrective actions taken, and a timeline for addressing any remaining issues. The FCC emphasized that the notice does not preclude further action if warranted.
The BBC now expects to close its flagship national radio service, Radio 4, on longwave at some point during 2026. This according to a BBC contact that has told the campaign to keep longwave. The news comes in a month that marks 91 years of broadcasting on longwave from the main Deutschwitz transmitter, and during the centenary year of one of the most iconic longwave programs, the Shipping Forecast. Meanwhile, the campaign to stop this shutdown altogether continues. Any long-wave shutdown during 2026 would leave the shipping forecast inaudible to many mariners, as FM and Coast Guard signals cannot travel further than a few miles offshore. It would also deprive thousands of long-wave listeners across the country from a much-loved source of news, entertainment, and education in the form of Radio 4, which isn't available in all areas on FM or DAB. Contrary to rumors circulated on some parts of the internet, however, an exact shutdown date for longwave has not yet been decided, as the BBC continues to carry out an impact assessment on the closure of the service. The BBC has stated its intention to inform listeners of the actual date at least 2 months before the signal is shut off, and this could happen as early as January 2026 or not till December. The campaign to keep longwave continues to push for this date to be put back further and indeed indefinitely postponed. In a report called Still Speaking to the Nations, published earlier this year, it set out several important reasons for keeping the longwave broadcast. Those reasons include the low energy costs of broadcasting from a single transmitter to the whole nation, the importance of a single nationwide reliable signal in the event of war or cyber attack that could render the internet inaccessible, the need for longwave broadcasts of shipping forecasts at sea, provision of Radio 4 in parts of the country that are poorly served by FM, DAB, and the internet. the heritage value of continuing a service that's run for nearly a century, let alone the countless vintage receivers capable of tuning in, and no hard evidence that longwave listenership is declining and the need to attract new listeners to radio for the BBC's own survival. Added to this, we can now conclude that the importance of Radio 4 longwave to some listeners in war-torn Ukraine, who can find therein a trustworthy source of news that cannot be blocked by hostile powers. The BBC has yet to provide a detailed response to the report or to petition to keep the longwave containing over 5,000 signatures, which was delivered in person to the Broadcasting House back on June 7, 2025. In a time of uncertainty, division, and political turmoil, the importance of Radio 4 longwave has never been greater.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
A bulletin sent to members of ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, included information about the impact of the United States government shutdown on licensing for the amateur radio service. The government shutdown began at 12:01 Eastern Time on Wednesday, October 1st, 2025, when Congress had not passed an appropriations bill or other plan to keep the government funded for the new fiscal year beginning October 1st. Here with more details on how the shutdown affects amateur radio, we go to League headquarters for this report from John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
Federal Communications Commission, which issues amateur radio service licenses, issued a public notice on Tuesday, September 30th, indicating that it would suspend most operations following a shutdown. The FCC notice said, aside from a few emergency and auction filing systems, all other Commission electronic filing systems will be unavailable to the public until normal agency operations resume. ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinator Manager Maria Soma, AB1FM, said the FCC systems appeared to go offline about 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, and they are redirecting to the public notice. This means the FCC will not be processing any amateur radio license applications during the shutdown, which includes individual, club, and exam sessions, new and upgrade applications. But ARRL volunteer examiners should continue giving exam sessions, said Soma. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep serving new and upgraded candidates for amateur radio licenses. Soma also urged that volunteer examiners continue to promptly forward session results from their exams to the ARRL VEC. Please do not hold on to your session results. Send your sessions to us, and ARRL VEC will continue to queue all applications as they are received. Once the federal government reopens, ARRL VEC will promptly resume submitting applications to the FCC for processing, so keep sending sessions to the ARRL VEC. The FCC shutdown notice indicate that CORD's registration system would remain available for certain activities, but new registrations are not currently being accepted. This means that new applicants cannot register for an FRN. This has created a temporary barrier for individuals who wish to take the amateur radio exam but do not yet have an FRN. Existing users can still log in and access their accounts, and applicants who already have an FRN can test without issue. Given the current situation, there is active discussion within the testing community about temporarily allowing testing without an FRN, with the understanding that the applicant would take the exam and receive a certificate of successful completion of the examination, and then once CORDS resumes issued new registration, the applicant would register for an FRN, contact the coordinator VEC with their FRN, and have their application submitted retroactively. This approach would preserve momentum for new licensees and avoid delays in testing, and please continue to check the ARRL website for updates as they become available. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The FCC's Universal Licensing System, or ULS, databases are also currently unavailable to the public. ULS and related systems like the License Manager, License Search, Application Search, etc., are not accessible during the shutdown. Users cannot file applications with the FCC or access license data, including address information. The ARRL VEC program has a long-standing tradition of serving the amateur radio service and the Federal Communications Commission with integrity and expertise. As the largest VEC in the nation, the ARRL VEC operates as a knowledgeable information source for a wide range of licensing services and issues. The ARRL VEC supports nearly 30,000 ARRL-accredited volunteer examiners who support the amateur radio community by offering exam opportunities.
There is momentum to involve every radio amateur in ARRL's grassroots campaign to pass the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act. For all the details, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this special report.
Hosts from popular amateur radio YouTube channels have engaged their subscribers to learn more about the legislation, and some have even hosted ARRL leaders for interviews on their shows. A common theme is how easy it is and how easy ARRL has made it for every ham to send letters to Congress. Go to www.arrl.org/HOA and click Send Your Letters. Then enter your call sign and push the Send My Letters button. It's just that easy. ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, was the guest on Ham Radio Crash Course, interviewed by Josh Nash, KI6NAZ. That program was streamed live on September 18th, 2025. Jason Johnston, KC5HWB, has just finished a series of videos for his 30 Days of Ham Radio project on his channel, Ham Radio 2.0. For Day 25, September 25th, Johnson produced an in-depth breakdown of H.R. 1094 and S-459, the bipartisan bill supported by ARRL's campaign. You can watch what ARRL's latest move means for your radio amateur future. Imagine being told you can't even put a small antenna on your property, said Hayden Honeywood, VK7HH, in the opening of his video for Ham Radio DX, published on September 29th. Hayden comes to viewers from Tasmania, Australia, and he is also a U.S. licensee, KD9SSB. Not in the backyard, not on the roof, and not even hidden in a tree. For thousands of American hams, that's the reality under HOA rules. Brett Glass, W57BG, and Glenn Popeil, KW5GP, interviewed ARRL West Gulf Division Director John Robert Stratton, NA5AUS, on September 23rd. Stratton emphasized the importance of getting every ham to send a letter. You can see that discussion on YouTube, listen to it on Podbean, or view it on Facebook. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
One addition to the list is Tim Duffy, K3LR, also hosted Stratton on DX Engineering's Weekend Special for September 26th. During the 15-minute live stream, Stratton answered questions from viewers about the work ARRL has already accomplished to secure congressional sponsors for the bills.
As part of ARRL's Year of the Club, ARRL is hosting a club newsletter contest. With more details on this exciting new contest, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
The club newsletter can keep members informed of news and upcoming events and keep them interested between meetings and activities, teach them about ham radio skills and technology, or even make them laugh, remember, or set an operating goal. The sky is the limit. ARRL wants to see what your club does with the mix of information that can go into a newsletter. Enter the club newsletter contest for a chance to have your newsletter honored in QST. Here are the rules and requirements. The club newsletter contest is open to ARRL-affiliated clubs that have published a newsletter for at least 1 year. Submit PDF files of 1 year's worth of consecutively published issues, no gaps there, ending with your most recent issue. If your newsletter is monthly, submit 12 consecutive issues. If your newsletter is bi-monthly, submit 6 consecutive issues. And if your newsletter is quarterly, submit 4 consecutive issues. Publication dates may span 2024, 2025, 2026 if necessary. Submissions must include a completed club newsletter contest submission form, which asks for information about your club and newsletter, as well as a 500-word statement on the purpose of your newsletter and how the newsletter's contents and design fulfill that purpose. Part of the judging process will include a comparison of these statements with the newsletter samples. Winners will be notified in May 2026 with awards presented at the Huntsville Hamfest in August of 2026. Remember, the submission deadline is Friday, January 30th, 2026 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. More details are available at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Once again, the publication dates may span 2024, 2025, and 2026 if necessary. For example, if your newsletter is published monthly and the September 2025 issue is your most recent publication at the time of your submission, Send us all 12 issues from October 2024 through September 2025. Do not send additional issues once you have submitted 1 year's worth of issues. Winners will be announced in a 2026 issue of QST as part of ARRL's Year of the Club celebration. The QST article may present material from the 500-word statements supplied in the Winners Club newsletter contest submission form. Please note that winners may be asked to supply high-resolution files of specific newsletter pages. And again, the submission deadline is Friday, January 30th, 2026 at 1600 Eastern Time.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
The ARRL Foundation is accepting grant applications from amateur radio organizations for eligible amateur radio-related projects and initiatives, particularly those focused on educating, licensing, and supporting amateur radio activities. To grow amateur radio's future, youth-based projects and initiatives are specially encouraged. The ARRL Foundation Grants Program accepts proposals on a cyclical model 3 times a year, in February, June, and October. Proposals for the October grant period are accepted through October 31st. Awardees will be notified approximately 1 month after the closing of each cycle. The ARRL Foundation carefully manages a portfolio of endowments in which donors have provided specific goals for their gifts, and that portfolio is invested and managed in a way that it can continue to support those goals for many years to come. Additional information and a link to the grant application can be found at www.arrl.org/amateur-radio-grants.
In the U.S., the FCC has charged an amateur radio operator with unauthorized operation on a frequency assigned for use by public safety agencies, private mobile paging, and businesses. The FCC's action against Matthew Davidson, KG7EFI, stems from a complaint its Enforcement Bureau received on July 10th, barely 1 month after Davidson was granted his technician class license. Technician licensees are permitted use of VHF bands, including 6 meters, 2 meters, and 1.25 meters. According to the complaint, enforcement agents said Davidson, who lives in Utah, was questioned 18 days after the complaint and admitted that he was transmitting on 173.675 megahertz, a frequency that is unauthorized under his license. The FCC has given him 20 days to file a formal written response.
With the birth of the 13 Colonies special event here in the United States as a 4-day event in 2009, Ken Vallone, Kilo Uniform 2 Uniform Sierra, began a ham radio revolution. Inspired by the fun of the ARRL sweepstakes, the military veteran had hoped to organize a special on-the-air event that would spotlight American history and celebrate the nation's independence during the days surrounding the July 4th holiday. As Ken told the ARRL earlier this year, the 2008 sweepstakes spurred him to try his luck for 1 year only to see what happens and to have some fun. The man who made sure that the fun would continue each year afterward became a silent key on October 2nd following a lengthy illness. In the years before his death, the 13 Colonies event had become an internationally popular activity with bonus stations and chasers around the world. Only weeks before this year's event, with his health worsening, Ken transferred the event's leadership to his friend, Tony Jones, November 4 Alpha Tango Juliet, coordinator of North Carolina's Kilo 2 Juliet station. With the help of Bob Josiewicz, Whiskey Alpha 3 Papa Zulu Oscar, the 13 Colonies event went forward. Ken stayed active as state manager for Kilo 2 Alpha operators in New York. Tony went on to say that the event's 2025 certificate was one that Ken himself designed, and that only one change was made to it, so it reflected that the event was honoring him as its founder this year. One event operator on Facebook wrote, Ken had no idea just what he had created. What started as a small event over the next 17 years became one of the most participated and celebrated ham radio events, not only in the United States but around the world. Next year's event will mark the 250th anniversary of the nation's independence, and Tony will be looking for ways to mark the milestone while continuing to honor Ken. He said, I will miss Ken and his guidance. Ken was 76.
4 foreign-controlled testing laboratories that evaluate electronics imported for use in the United States have been denied recognition by the Federal Communications Commission. Just days before the shutdown that affected much of the U.S. government, including the FCC, the Commission announced that the 4 labs, like the 11 the Commission denied early in September, were controlled by Chinese interests. That makes for a total of 15 such labs rejected so far by the FCC's Office of Engineering and Technology, as part of the administration's goal to give U.S.-owned companies the responsibility of certifying electronics for import and sale within the United States. All approved equipment must demonstrate that it's not a threat to U.S. national security and must comply with FCC standards. This move is the latest following the Commission's adoption in May of the order. At that time the order was announced, the FCC disclosed that about 75% of all electronics sold in the United States are being tested by Chinese laboratories.
Dennis Markell, November 1, India Mike Whiskey, has been appointed ARRL New Hampshire Section Manager effective October 1st, 2025. The role has been open since the term ended on June 30th, 2025. Markell is active with his local radio club and participates in Parks on the Air. He will serve for the remaining term, which ends on June 30th, 2027. The previous section manager was Peter Stower, Whiskey 1, Foxtrot Echo Alpha, who served from 2013 to 2019 and 2021 to 2025.
It is time for this month's Volunteer Monitor Program Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between the ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the current activity report of the Volunteer Monitor Program. Technician operators in Florida and Georgia received advisories concerning 17-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians have no privileges. Technician operators in Florida, California, and Oregon received advisory notices concerning 20-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians also have no privileges. A commendation was issued to an operator in Ohio for exceptional work with the April 29, 2025 Skyward net on the Preble County 145.470 MHz repeater. There was one virtual club presentation about the Volunteer Monitor Program, and the totals for this report's monitoring were 1,208 hours on HF frequencies and 1,668 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 2,876 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this month's report.
2 Faraday cages have been put in place at the Square Kilometre Array site in Western Australia to protect the giant radio telescope from interference caused by RF leaks coming from inside the data center. The data center and the array are being built in Murchison, a remote location that provides a needed environment of radio quietness. Despite the radio silence at the location, the data center's computers, which connect to the city of Perth, generate stray RF, spurring the need for Faraday cages to prevent the electromagnetic energy from escaping. The International Massive Array, which will have 131,072 antennas, is still a work in progress since it was started in 2022. The site in Australia is home to the array's low-frequency antennas. South Africa is housing the mid-frequency antennas. The observatory and headquarters are at the Jodrell Bank Observatory in northwest England. Although the array will still be a work in progress through to 2029, Philip Diamond, director of the Square Kilometer Array Observatory, recently told the Register website that tests may be run on the facility as early as 2027. He told the Register, "By then we will have the largest physical low-frequency telescope on the planet."
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
As we have been reporting for the past few weeks, the government of Equatorial Guinea temporarily has suspended all amateur radio license. This decision follows the revelation of a case involving a foreign amateur radio operator who gained access to sensitive areas with unauthorized equipment. The authorities are committed to establishing a new regulatory framework that guarantees effective control over the use of telecommunications frequencies and equipment in accordance with national security requirements. Meanwhile, Italian radio amateurs have been authorized to use the 40 MHz band until the end of the year. They are allowed to operate at 40.660 MHz to 40.700 MHz with a maximum power of 10 watts. The Italian regulator has also given permission until December 31st for Italian amateurs to operate on 70.1, 70.2, and 70.3 MHz. And remember, you may be able to hear them, but you cannot work them.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. The DX word for this week is tail ending. Tail ending refers to a specific operating technique used to initiate contact with another station immediately after a QSO ends. More specifically, it means waiting for two stations to finish their QSO and then quickly calling one of them as soon as they sign off. It's a way to jump in without interrupting the ongoing exchange. This technique is especially common in pileups or contesting when you're trying to contact a rare or desirable station. For example, if WB8LCD and N8SY were wrapping up a QSO, you might hear 7-3 from WB8LCD. At that moment, I might say AJ8B, just as WB8LCD stops transmitting. This approach is considered efficient as long as the station you're trying to QSO with doesn't mind. Some do. I typically only use this technique during a contest or pileup, and if you're going to use it, you should practice it. Each week I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. During the Scouts Jamboree on the Air JOTA event this year, October 18th and 19th, special call sign E2 JOTA will be active from Thailand. JOTA is an annual event in scouting that facilitates global communication among scouts through amateur radio. It is held in conjunction with Jamboree on the Internet, JOTI, on the third full weekend of October each year. Ken, LA7GAA, reports that the 3Y0K Bouvet container has departed from Oslo and is now en route to Bouvet Island, making the beginning of its long journey after being packed ahead of schedule last month. It seems like a long time ago we started talking about this, and now it's right on top of us, so good luck to those guys. Chris, VK2YUS, will once again operate as YJ0CA from Port Vila, Vanuatu between October 14th and the 24th, 2025. He'll be active on single sideband only using the same equipment as before, a simple wire antenna and vertical covering 40 meters to 10 meters, along with IC7300 and a compact amplifier. Most of his operating will take place between 2100 Zulu and 1000 Zulu. Please note that Chris exclusively uses paper logbooks and provides confirmations via high-quality physical QSL cards. He does not use electronic logging or QSL systems. Requested QSL cards for confirmed contacts will be mailed by airmail from Australia in November. For full QSL details, please visit his website on qrz.com. After, quote, complicated discussions with customs, end quote, Harold, DF2WO, was able to obtain his confiscated equipment for his XT2AW Burkina Faso DXpedition. He was QRV Monday just before 1900 Zulu with reports of FT8 activity on 60, 12, 10, and 6 meters. He was also heard as CW on 15 meters and sideband on 10 meters. He has also been on the QO100 satellite. Harold plans to be there for the next 3 weeks, operating 160 through 6 meters. As a reminder, VE7BV Dwight is QRV from Guatemala, where he is operating holiday style as Tango Golf 9, Bravo Bravo Victor until October 25th. Activity is on CW sideband and FT8 on 40 meters through 50 megahertz. QSL Director via the Bureau to VE7BV. Harry, JG7PSJ, is QRV as W80RU from Saipan in the Northern Mariana Islands until October 12th. Halvar, LA7XK, will be joined by LA9DL and LA6VM for an annual trip to JW, Svalbard, that they have done together since 2001, and they hope to continue in future years. They will be QRV until October 14th, including the phone weekend of the Scandinavian Activity Contest, and they will have the call sign JW5X in the contest. Their personal calls are JW9DL, JW6VM, and JW7XK. Mario, PY2DV, and Bruce, PY2BS, are on their way to PY0F Fernando de Noronha and should be QRV by now as PY0FB and PY0FBS, respectively, operating holiday style. Mario will be QRV as PY0FB on the HF bands, 80 through 10 meters, and possibly 6 meters, with an emphasis on sideband and some FT8, FT4. Bruce will be QRV as PY0FBS on 23 centimeters EME. They will be there until October 15th. At the end of the operation, they will upload all QSOs 100% free to LOTW. The V6 Delta DXpedition to Micronesia has come to an end. On Monday afternoon local time, they dismantled the beam and the large vertical antennas. The other antennas remained in place for a few hours more. Quote, with a total of over 90,000 QSOs from more than 160 DXCC areas and over 20,000 unique stations, we were very satisfied with the result. On Tuesday, we will return via Guam and Tokyo. After our arrival in Germany, the log will be checked for accuracy and a final version will be made available on Club Log for OQRS. Our sponsors will then receive their LOTW confirmation shortly. The QSL cards should be printed in about 4 weeks, and then our QSL manager will begin shipping them according to priority. Generous sponsors will receive a small photo book, which should be available in early December. Thank you from our team of 9 to everyone who supported us and worked with us. The Rebel DX group is QRV from NUI as E6 Alpha Delta. For the first weeks, the emphasis will be on FT4, MSHV, and SuperFox. The entire operation will emphasize digital in CW with, quote, a little single sideband as well. I have an update from the North Cook Islands, E51 Mike Whiskey Alpha. Quote, we will be in Ratonga by October 7th. We will then begin building our antenna field by late afternoon. It will take a few days to unpack our equipment and get on the air. We are fortunate that this time all the equipment shipped and carried on is delivered with us. We are carrying a 6-meter antenna and KX3 as a dedicated 6-meter receiver with a loud alarm alerting us to any activity. So get on 6 meters and call CQ using FT8. When openings occur, we will shift 1 or 3 of our operating stations to 6 meters. We are very excited to get started. Team E51 MWA. Good luck to those guys. The DX Mentor features a new YouTube episode this weekend, the Salty Walt K6OGO discussion about his new book, Portable Antenna Sketchbook. And Walt is an absolute hoot. We had a blast doing it, and I hope you kind of tune in and check it out. Let me know what you think. If you're interested in DX podcasts and YouTube channels about DX, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of our DX activities. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-pal Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 44th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our appreciation goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for giving us permission to use his website in the presentation of these segments. Now, come along with us as we bring you the next chapter of Ham Radio History. High latitudes and low wavelengths. This is part 2 of this segment. In Chicago, Matthews announced that a prize, a duplicate of the receiver installed on the Bowden, awaited the next U.S. or Canadian amateur to take an official Macmillan message. Schnell remarked that one A&A already has made room in his shack for this outfit. Unfortunately, Bowen was taken out of contention, forced to shut down shortly after his initial contacts when his employer, RCA, transferred him to their Marion, Massachusetts station. Although very spotty contact continued as fall approached, Mix began to hear West Coast stations frequently. Finally, just before midnight on 7 September, 7DC made brief contact, but signal strength and conditions were so poor he could not even get the all's well message from Mix. Others were listening too. Jack Barnsley, Canadian 9BP at Prince Rupert, British Columbia, happened to hear WNP trying without success to reestablish contact with 7DC that night. After waiting a few minutes for a reply and not hearing one, he called WNP and was thrilled a half minute later when Mix replied that he was very QSA, meaning perfectly readable. Barnsley copied the first NANA news bulletin from WNP after the expedition set up camp, and was then in regular contact for the rest of the year. Having kept detailed logs and traffic count by the word, Mix later reported that of the 16,000 total words he'd sent, fully half had gone through 9BP. On one night, he worked nearly 2 hours copying 30 words under conditions where an ordinary operator would have given up, wrote Mix. Barnsley's anchor station, 9BP, had also been the westernmost participant in the Canadian Transcons, Transcontinental Message Relays. He used two 50-watt tubes with 1,500 volts on the plates for a transmitter and for receiving a Paragon Model RA10 regenerative tuner and Model DA two-stage audio amplifier similar to Godley's station in Ardrossan. It was fed with an inverted L aerial of conventional cage design, having a vertical section 65 feet high and a 75-foot horizontal run with a 12-wire counterpoise ground system strung below. Jack Barnsley would accept the CRL Zenith receiving setup in reward for his work with WNP. The equinox came and went and nights grew unusually long. By mid-November 1923, the Bowden was frozen in place at temperatures well below 0 Fahrenheit, and the sun had not been seen since late October, an uncomfortable environment for radio operators, but ideal for radio. WNP was now being copied mostly by West Coast stations, only a few elsewhere and none on the East Coast any longer. Besides receiving the news dispatches, 9BP was also passing along traffic to families of the expedition's crew and sending back news from home. With improving on-air conditions during November, 20 amateurs worked WNP in 51 QSOs. It was the best traffic month of the expedition, according to Mix, as 9BP continued to handle nearly all of their message traffic, including the press reports. A new two-way distance record was set in a 15-minute QSO between WNP and R. Smith, 6CEU, of Hilo, Hawaii, who was transmitting with 3 5-watt tubes. Mix wrote that he nearly fainted when he heard Smith answer his CQ. They continued to work each other right through the winter. Mix strung new antenna wires from the ship's mast to some nearby hills, a relief from the confines of the ship's dimensions, which had limited the antenna length. The Zenith equipment had been performing very reliably. No tubes had been changed since leaving Maine. At this point, he was getting news directly from 6 amateur stations, plus European commercial stations POZ and GBL, and reported hearing music from a station in Glasgow, the only European broadcaster that he could identify. As the winter progressed, he began to hear many more North American broadcasters. The crew was especially surprised one night to hear CFCN call out, "Hello WNP somewhere in the Arctic. Hope you are getting this." A cartoon drawn by frequent QST cover artist Clyde Darr, HZZ, depicted his conception of Don Mix's transformation from bow-tied and suited, clean-cut New Englander to whiskered and wild-haired Arctic explorer fitted in fur. Born in 1879, Darr had grown up in radio closely paralleling Vermilia's example, passing through the neighborhood telegraph, spark coil, and transformer stages to become a first-class CW operator as 8JAD and 8CB. After qualifying for a special license and receiving his prized 8ZZ call sign, his became the first station in Detroit to broadcast music. As president of the Detroit Radio Association, member of the ARRL board, and Central Division assistant manager, Darr was well known for his work both on and off the air. On 22 December 1923, President Coolidge sent a holiday greeting to the Macmillan expedition via the RCA station in Washington, D.C. Not having a commercial station in the Arctic, RCA then telephoned to ARRL headquarters to ask whether the League could convey the message. So QST technical editor Kurtz began trying to send it from his home station in Hartford that same night, but conditions were particularly poor with loud electrical power line noise pervading the air. He was therefore pleasantly startled to hear Darr at HZZ merrily chewing the rag with Mix at WNP. Kurtz called repeatedly but could not make contact. Exasperated, he turned for help from several other local stations who all tried to raise HZZ, only to hear Darr complain of the QRM, then abruptly sign off for bedtime, just missing his chance to deliver the president's Christmas message in time. The next night, Kurtz contacted 2 other Detroit area hams who went over to Darr's house and woke him up to try again for WNP, but it was not to be. On 24 December, HZZ finally got it relayed to Barnsley at Anchor Station 9BP, who uncharacteristically could not raise WNP either. After trying for several additional nights, he finally got through and passed the message on the evening of New Year's Day, 1924. The final reported routing path of the president's message was 1HX, 8ZZ, 5GO, 9BP, WNP. To speed things up, the reply message went via wire directly from Barnsley. Propagation continued to mystify and amaze all involved, especially when WNP reception reports began arriving from New Zealand. Unknown to the northern explorers, new radio territory was also being charted far south of 200 meters by explorers of another kind. The Macmillan expedition is one of the most well-documented and widely written about events in early amateur radio history. For additional reading, see the articles by Dilks and the book by Bartlett. We will pick up WNP again here later. Included in this material are quotes from the following: K.B. Warner, West Coast Working Bowden, WNP, QST, November 1923, page 21. K.B. Warner, 9BP, still chief contact with Macmillan, QST, December 1923, page 23. D.H. Mix, My Radio Experience in the Far North, QST, November 1924, page 17. Amateur Radio Stations, QST, December 1923, page 49. Splendid Contact with the Bowden, QST, January 1924, page 28. Who's Who in Amateur Wireless, QST, August 1922, page 48. K.B. Warner, Coolidge Holiday Greetings to Macmillan Travel via Amateur Radio, QST, February 1924, page 29. John Dilks, Where in the World is Bowden, QST, August 2008, page 95. John Dilks, Wireless North Pole Christmas, QST, December 2008, page 94. John Dilks, Don Mix Returns Home, QST, March 2010, page 94.
Richard A. Bartlett, The World of Ham Radio, 1901 to 1950, McFarland and Company, Incorporated, 2006, page 163. With our appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for permitting us to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, in the preparation of this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently, my local power company notified me of a planned network outage. That's code for we're turning off the power and your choice is to deal with it. If you've been paying attention, you'll note that this is not the first time this has happened in recent times. On this occasion, I want to make a difference and actually use the day wisely. Coincidentally, the 750th installment of F-Troop is coming up, and traditionally we try to find an excuse to get outside and set up a station in a local park somewhere. If you recall, I recently went outside and came across a new park, one with picnic tables, gazebos, toilets, and all the mod cons required for a party. Combine these unrelated events and you end up with testing the idea of running F-Troop, a weekly net for new and returning amateurs, from this park, which also neatly turns that into a POTA or Parks on the Air activity, which raises several logistical questions. The first one being, what is the radio noise like in this park? Followed shortly by the question, can I hit my local 2-meter repeater? Any 2-meter repeater, or the local 10-meter repeater? If the answer to those questions is unsatisfactory, I might be required to rethink my plans. Combining those questions with a power outage at home seems like the perfect excuse to go out into the bright day and get on air and make some noise. One challenge. Having removed my radio from my car several years ago to accommodate the replacement of the transmission, I never did replace it and never used my radio in the car again, which, truth be told, is not a situation I ever imagined when I first installed it many years ago. This leads me to creating a list, which should come as no surprise, a list with what I need to bring as a minimum requirement to test the questions I need answers to. I will confess that the making a radio packing list skill set has atrophied in recent times, so I started small. I'll need a radio and a suitable antenna, in my case at least two, one for 2 meters and one for 10 meters. Then there's the question of power, at which point I discovered that my trusty portable sealed lead acid batteries have finally died. Not bad after 15 years, well, 12 years of regular use. Likely they would have continued to be of service if I had used them in the past 3 years, mainly hampered by the death of my 12-volt battery charger. If you feel like I'm going off track, you'd be right. That was the exact experience I had when I started building my list. I added a digital multimeter, an antenna analyzer, an antenna tuner, and coax, then realized that I needed to check if the coax adapters were the right ones, and so it continued. The upshot is a preliminary list with 15 items on it, in various stages of fully populated. For example, I know I have a 2-meter and 70-centimeter antenna in the garage, but I haven't touched it in years, so I need to go find it. And the battery in my digital multimeter needs checking. You get the idea. It's a good thing I started this caper well over a week before the planned outage, so at least I have half a fighting chance to get it to the point of usefulness, before my screen turns black due to the threatened lack of electricity. It occurred to me whilst I was in the middle of this extended list creation process that I was essentially replicating what I might have experienced the very first time I went outside with my station in 2011. In coming to that realization, the stress levels that were building steadily at that point pretty much dissipated, with the understanding that I'd already done this and survived the experience. In other words, there was nothing worth stressing about. So this leaves me with a question for you. What does this process look like for you? How do you prepare to get on air and make noise? What steps do you take, and what do you avoid? Are there things you might share with a new amateur, and if so, how will you do that? I contemplated sharing the list in a public place, but realized that the power of the list isn't the items on it, but in the process of making it. So, no list, but the notion that you too can do this. And if it transpires that you forgot something, there's always the next adventure. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
As we have been reporting for the past few weeks, the government of Equatorial Guinea temporarily has suspended all amateur radio license. This decision follows the revelation of a case involving a foreign amateur radio operator who gained access to sensitive areas with unauthorized equipment. The authorities are committed to establishing a new regulatory framework that guarantees effective control over the use of telecommunications frequencies and equipment in accordance with national security requirements. Meanwhile, Italian radio amateurs have been authorized to use the 40 MHz band until the end of the year. They are allowed to operate at 40.660 MHz to 40.700 MHz with a maximum power of 10 watts. The Italian regulator has also given permission until December 31st for Italian amateurs to operate on 70.1, 70.2, and 70.3 MHz. And remember, you may be able to hear them, but you cannot work them.
At the International Astronomical Congress taking place in Sydney last week, representatives from the United States and Australia gathered to sign a framework agreement that strengthens collaboration in aeronautics and space exploration between the two nations. Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy and Australian Space Agency head Enrico Palermo signed the agreement Tuesday on behalf of their countries, respectively. Australia is an important and long-time space partner from Apollo to Artemis, and this agreement depends on that partnership, said Duffy. International agreements like this work to leverage our resources and increase our capabilities and scientific returns for all, proving critical to NASA's plans from low Earth orbit to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Australian Minister for Industry and Innovation and Minister for Science Tim Ayres said the signing builds on more than a half-century of collaboration between the two nations. Strengthening Australia's partnership with the U.S. and NASA creates new opportunities for Australian ideas and technologies, improving Australia's industrial capability, boosting productivity, and building economic resilience, Ayres said. Known as the Framework Agreement between the government of the United States of America and the government of Australia on cooperation in aeronautics and the exploration and use of aerospace and outer space for peaceful purposes, it recognizes cooperation that mutually is beneficial for the U.S. and Australia and establishes the legal framework under which the countries will work together. Potential areas for cooperation include space exploration, space science, earth science, including geodesy, space medicine, and life sciences, aeronautics research, and technology. NASA has collaborated with Australia on civil space activities since 1960, when the two countries signed their first cooperative space agreement. The Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex played a vital role in supporting NASA's Apollo program, most notably during the Apollo 13 mission. Well, today, the complex is one of 3 global stations in NASA's Deep Space Network, supporting both robotic and human spaceflight missions. One of the original signatories to the Artemis Accords, Australia joined the United States under President Donald Trump and 6 other nations in October 2020 in supporting a basic set of principles for the safe and responsible use of space. Global space leaders from many of the 56 signatory countries met in Sydney this week to further their implementation. As part of an existing partnership with the Australian Space Agency, Australia is developing a semi-autonomous lunar rover which will carry a NASA analysis instrument, which is intended to demonstrate technology for scientific and exploration purposes. The rover is scheduled to launch by the end of the decade through NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative. NASA's international partnerships reflect the agency's commitment to peaceful, collaborative space exploration, building on a legacy of cooperation from the Space Shuttle to the International Space Station, and now Artemis. International partnerships support NASA's plans for lunar exploration under the Artemis campaign and future human exploration of Mars.
Keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Amateur radio on the International Space Station, or ARISS, is pleased to announce the U.S. schools and host organizations newly selected for 2026 ARISS contacts. A total of 4 of the submitted proposals during the recent proposal window have been accepted to move forward in the process of planning to host a scheduled amateur radio contact with the crew on the ISS. The ARISS program anticipates that NASA will be able to provide scheduling opportunities for the 4 U.S. host organizations during the January 2026 through June 2026 time period. They are now at work starting to implement their 4 to 6 month education plan, which was outlined in their proposal. These STEM-based educational activities help prepare students for their contact, as well as create an ongoing exploration and interest in aerospace and amateur radio topics. They are also completing an acceptable equipment plan that demonstrates their ability to execute the ham radio contact. Once their equipment plan is approved by ARISS, the final selected schools and organizations will be scheduled as their availability and flexibility match up with the scheduling opportunities offered by NASA. The schools and host organizations are ASU STEM Preparatory Academy in Mesa, Arizona, Con Magnet Elementary School in Raleigh, North Carolina, the Center for Creativity, Innovation, and Discovery in Providence, Utah, and the Ecotarium in Worcester, Massachusetts. The primary goal of the ARISS program is to engage young people in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math activities, and raise awareness of space communications, radio communications, space exploration, and related areas of study and career possibilities.
Here is an update on a story we have been covering for well over 2 years now, the Help Save AM Radio in Your Car bill in Congress. And it would seem like the wheels of the U.S. Congress indeed turn slowly. However, this issue has not died and appears to be closer to passage in Washington. More than 2/3 of the U.S. House of Representatives have now signed on to co-sponsor the bill, seeking to block automakers from removing AM radios from new vehicles. A move supporters say is essential for public safety and emergency communications. As we come to air, the measure had attracted 296 co-sponsors in the House, easily surpassing the 2/3 threshold, with members from both parties lining up behind it. In the Senate, a companion bill has secured 61 co-sponsors, also demonstrating bipartisan support and giving the proposal strong momentum in both chambers. The push to preserve AM radio has also become a symbolic debate over technology, tradition, and safety. Lawmakers say the issue resonates with constituents who may not listen to AM daily but want it available when disaster strikes. Rural representatives have been especially vocal, pointing out that their districts rely heavily on AM signals that cut through terrain where line-of-sight FM and cell service is unreliable.
In a move applauded by a number of lawmakers, the Federal Communications Commission has given prisons and other correctional facilities the authorization to use cell phone jamming technology to disable devices smuggled into inmates. Federal law prohibits the sale and operation of equipment that interferes with the operation of authorized radio communications, including GPS and cellular phones. According to the FCC, the September 30th vote was taken to halt what authorities say are criminal activities, such as drug dealing or killings, being conducted by persons who are incarcerated. The FCC said that its action would coordinate efforts between corrections officials and wireless carriers and is not designed to interfere with wireless services of cellular customers in the vicinity of the prisons. The move drew praise from a number of lawmakers, such as David Kustoff, a Republican congressman who in March had introduced the Cell Phone Jamming Reform Act of 2025.
TuneIn.com, a popular radio and podcast streaming app, is teaming up with the USA's Federal Emergency Management Agency's integrated public alert and warning system to deliver emergency alerts through its Android Auto TuneIn app. The streaming audio platform heralded the announcement as an important step forward as the industry shifts toward digital-first audio experiences. TuneIn's internet-based service delivers reliable audio quality and broader coverage than traditional radio, especially in areas where terrestrial signals may be limited, a release said. The feature offers iPause alerts from the local, state, tribal, and federal agency level to TuneIn users in affected areas. It is available to auto manufacturers that integrate TuneIn as part of their vehicle infotainment systems through Android Auto. A TuneIn spokesperson said the company has no specifics for motorists who use Apple CarPlay for infotainment or phone projection. The spokesperson added that the company is exploring all options.
A U.S. federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to halt layoffs at Voice of America, freezing the planned elimination of 532 full-time staff positions at the U.S. Agency for Global Media. The cuts would have represented most of the agency's remaining employees. In his written order, Lamberth said he no longer harbors any doubt that the defendants lack a plan to comply with a preliminary injunction. He accused officials of running out the clock on the fiscal year while remaining in violation of even the most meager reading of U.S. Agency for Global Media and Voice of America's statutory obligations. The White House criticized the decision in a statement to Reuters, calling Royce an activist judge who was attempting to subvert the will of the American people. Under the direction of Trump advisor Kari Lake, approximately 1,400 U.S. Agency for Global Media employees have been terminated or placed on indefinite leave since March. The cuts included nearly 600 contract employees and most permanent staff, bringing VOA's 49 language services down to 4 languages, while canceling contracts with the Associated Press, Reuters, and other news services.
Zoe Rodriguez, a teacher at the Raymond School in Franksville, Wisconsin, near Milwaukee, has been named the 2025 Carter Craigie November 3 Alpha Oscar Memorial Educator. For more details on this special award, we go to our correspondent, John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report from League headquarters.
Rodriguez serves as the Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics STEAM teacher, as well as the school's technology integrator and library media specialist. She also started a club for 3 through 8th graders called Girls Who Code. She attended the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology, TI, at ARRL headquarters from October 6th to the 9th, 2025. Rodriguez, who previously was a Fulbright scholar who taught English in Columbia, is currently participating in the Teacher Innovation Institute, a 2-year program from the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. The Carter Craigie N3AO Memorial Educator of the Year program funds a seat at the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology. It was created in 2024 through a generous generous endowment given by former ARRL President Kay Craigie and 3KN in memory of her late husband Carter, who was also an avid radio amateur, first licensed in 1981. Rodriguez looks forward to taking what she learned at TI and sharing it with other teachers at the Raymond School. Not only will this support my teaching, but I will be able to support our general education teachers in integrating the concepts I learn and create more engagement in their curriculum, she said. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Rodriguez is excited to integrate amateur radio and wireless technology into her broad experience she shares with her students. The Teachers Institute would provide tangible ways to help my students engage in critical thinking and real-world problems. This program would allow me to create highly engaging and hands-on projects where my students could work collaboratively and build their communication skills. This will not only fit into, but strengthen my curriculum as I currently teach the engineering design process, circuits, coding, robotics, 3D printing, and cardboard construction, said Rodriguez. A graduate of Woodbury Forest School and Williams College, Carter Craigie earned a Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania in 1976. Despite lifelong challenges with learning disabilities, Carter became a beloved educator. He taught 5th grade at Montgomery Country Day School in Wynwood, Pennsylvania. He also taught at the Cabrini College in Radnor, Pennsylvania, retiring in 1995 after 25 years on the faculty as professor of English and Communications. He became Silent Key in 2024.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Bruce Page, KA5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. The AMSAT Symposium is about a week away. If you cannot attend and are interested in satellite operation, the symposium will be live streamed on the AMSAT YouTube channel. Topics starting Friday afternoon are Ascent Team Propulsion, Oscar to OS Tracks, Fox Plus Mechanical Layout and Design, Extending Command and Control for Golf, ERIS, Youth Initiative, and ARDC. Saturday will be CubeSat Sim, Bridging Orbit and Classroom using SatNogs and CubeSat Sim. A new use for Fox and MESAT-1 Whole Orbit Data Algorithm. Telemetry for Fox Plus and Gulf CubeSats. Gulf T Electrical Power Supply. Engineering, Gulf T Update. Fox Plus Update, followed by the annual general meeting. Do not forget, if you're in the area and need QSL cards checked for ARRL, Worked All States, VUCC, or DXCC, I can do that for you during the symposium. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at space weather and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity was at low levels this past week. Low-level C-class X-ray emissions from a source around the western limb were the strongest of the period. Region 4241 produced a C1.9 flare on October 6. Newly numbered Region 4244 was quiet as it rotated further from the eastern limb. Regions 4236 and 4232 remained the largest on the visible disk but did not produce any notable activity in the past 24 hours. Additional activity included a filament eruption near S20E25 that began on October 5 and was ongoing at the time of writing. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed in available coronagraph imagery. There exists a chance for solar flare activity to reach moderate levels, with a slight chance for strong flaring on October 6 through the 8th. A slight chance for R1 and R2 radio blackouts will remain for October 9th. R1 and 2 probabilities increase to a low chance on October 10th with the prospect of regions due to return. Solar wind parameters reflected slightly enhanced conditions likely due to magnetic cloud influences. Solar wind speeds averaged near or just under 400 kilometers per second. Phi was mostly in the positive solar sector. Weakening parameters are expected by October 9th, with a return to a nominal environment anticipated on October 10th. Solar activity has been declining since the beginning of October, as expected. The last slightly larger sunspot group, designated as active region AR 4236, disappeared behind the northwestern limb of the solar disk in the middle of the present week. Almost immediately after it became invisible to us, a moderately strong eruption occurred. This happened on Thursday, October 9th, peaking at 12:31 Universal Time Coordinated. However, the decline in solar activity will continue, followed by an increase that should last for almost the entire second half of October. This will include a positive effect on the state of the F2 ionospheric layer. Although this did not bring such good conditions for shortwave propagation, precisely because of the decline in solar radiation, there were interesting improvements here and there, especially at the beginning of geomagnetic disturbances, most recently on the afternoon of October 7th. However, another phenomenon played a major role in the surprising improvement in shortwave propagation conditions between Europe and the antipodes on October 8th, the rare and rather unusual occurrence of a sporadic E-layer at this time of year. Official forecasts of increased solar activity for the second half of October are rather skeptical for the time being. This is probably because the activity on the far side of the Sun, as measured by helioseismological methods, is not high. However, this may change. A surprise in the form of faster growth cannot be ruled out. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
Just ahead in Radio Sport this week, on October 10th, the 10 International 10-10-Day Sprint CW Phone and Digital. October 11th and 12th, the ARRL EME Contest, CW Phone and Digital there. October 11th and 12th as well, the Oceania DX Contest, CW. The Scandinavian Activity Contest, Single Sideband and Phone. The Nevada QSO Party, CW Phone and Digital. The Arizona QSO Party, CW and Phone. Also on the 11th and 12th of October, the Pennsylvania QSO Party, CW and Phone, and the South Dakota QSO Party, CW and Phone there. And on October 12th, the UVA ON Contest, 80-40 meters, that is CW. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information in your area. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, October 10th through the 12th, Pacificon hosting the ARRL Pacific Division Convention in San Ramon, California. October 10th through the 11th, the Melbourne Hamfest hosting the ARRL Florida State Convention in Melbourne, Florida. October 10th and 11th as well, SparkCon hosting the ARRL Midwest Division Convention. That's in Sedalia, Missouri. And on October 11th, it's the North Star Radio Convention hosting the ARRL Minnesota State Convention. That's in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area.
A 17-year-old radio amateur from rural Malawi has joined the DXpedition team that is headed to Andaman and Nicobar Island in the Bay of Bengal in October of 2026. Urgent Gir, 7Q6UJ, is not just along for the ride. Barely a year after passing his U.S. technician exam, he has already confirmed 168 DXCC countries as a chaser. Soon, he will be on the other end of that envious pileup. He is studying to upgrade his license and sharpening his proficiency in CW. Urgent was mentored by Don Jones, 7Q6M, K6ZO, as part of a project created by Hack DC Amateur Radio Club of Washington, D.C., and supported by the Jeffrey Dahm Memorial Foundation. Urgent hopes his efforts will inspire other young people in Africa to embrace amateur radio too. One of Urgent's next trips after India will not be to a DXpedition, but to an even longer journey that will shape the rest of his life. He plans to go to the U.S., where he hopes to combine academic studies with radio science at Virginia Tech University.
Colorado students spent some time last month bouncing their voices off the moon. On Saturday, September 27, 2025, the Deep Space Exploration Society hosted their annual open house event, drawing around 65 excited visitors to the Filsner Radio Telescope and Science Center just south of Haswell, Colorado. Haswell is in an underserved southeastern portion of Colorado where school children don't have the kind of exposure to science as do students in the major cities like Denver and Colorado Springs. The Filsner Radio Telescope and Science Center is that exposure for them and more. The highlight was definitely the incredible 60-foot dish functioning flawlessly, and everybody loved hearing their voices bounce off the moon, said Paul Sobin, N0OT, president of the Deep Space Exploration Society. It was a thrilling experience for both kids and adults, and we even used the 23-centimeter wavelength amateur radio station to demonstrate how contact can be made with stations across the country, in the United States, Hawaii, and Australia by bouncing them off the moon. Those attended agreed it was a fantastic day with perfect weather, filled with fun, learning, and community spirit. Haswell Mayor Michelle Nelson provided lunch for the event, and sales were so good there that a generous donation was made to the Carville High School 2026 graduating class. The New Jersey Knights of Columbus Amateur Radio Club, NJ2KC, will host a special event October 11th through the 13th, 2025, to celebrate the 233rd anniversary of Columbus Day. The event is scheduled for 0000 Zulu to 2359 Zulu, using 7.234, 14.234, 21.234, and 28.424 megahertz. The day was first celebrated in New York City on October 12, 1886. Today it's a federal holiday, recognized in some states as Indigenous Peoples Day.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The Greater St. Louis Area Scouting Council will be active during this year's JOTA and JOTI event, and all stations will be on the air October 17th through the 19th, 2025. JOTA and JOTI, Jamboree on the Air and Jamboree on the Internet, is the world's largest digital and amateur radio scout event promoting friendship and global citizenship. Tom Dougherty, November 0, Tango Juliet Delta, Greater St. Louis Area Scouting STEM Radio Community Chairman, said they received an ARRL Foundation grant late last year for $21,865, which allowed for new amateur radio equipment to be installed at scout camps around the region. For the JOTA and JOTI event, scouts will have a total of 7 stations operating, HF, UHF, and VHF, and 1 portable HF station. In the Greater St. Louis Area Council, all science, technology, engineering, and mathematics directors for each district, a total of 22 districts encompassing 27,000 scouts, have been promoting the event since early August. Jamboree on the Air and Jamboree on the Internet is held on the 3rd full weekend of October each year, coordinated by the World Organization of the Scout Movement. For registration and all of the details, visit the Jamboree on the Air and Jamboree on the Internet websites.
After announcing on October 6th that it would vote on a notion of proposed rulemaking on ATC 3.0 at its October meeting, the Federal Communications Commission released a draft of the measure that provides more details on how it plans to consider the matter and which questions it might explore. The draft, which could change before the FCC is scheduled to vote on October 28, raised more questions than answers about how the agency might act on key issues related to next-gen TV, but does provide some hints on how FCC Chairman Brendan Carr is thinking about the subject. The draft notes that the FCC has tentatively concluded that TV stations should be allowed to choose when to stop broadcasting via the ATSC 1.0 standard and begin broadcasting exclusively in 3.0. It also tentatively concluded that TV stations should be allowed to broadcast in both 1.0 and 3.0, as many are doing now, but with fewer restrictions and requirements than the 1.0 version. This would free up more spectrum for advanced ATC 3.0 services. The draft would take a more neutral approach to other key issues, raising a series of questions about key topics, like the creation of new rules mandating ATC 3.0 tuners in all new TVs. Consumer electronics firms have consistently opposed a tuner mandate, arguing that it would increase the cost of TV sets and is generally unnecessary because most consumers access video content over streaming and pay TV services rather than over-the-air antennas. Next-gen TV is coming, and it will transform local broadcasting into a vibrant, interactive service that not only competes with big tech streaming platforms, but also delivers enhanced emergency alerting, hyper-local weather warnings, and life-saving public safety information.
The ARIS team is working towards 2 short SSTV activations for October 2025. Both of those are expected to start on a Friday and end on the following Monday. The first event is ARIS's traditional celebration of the launch of the first artificial Earth satellite in 1957. The SSTV activation started on a Friday. That was Friday, October 3rd, and ran to Monday, October 6th. The second SSTV campaign is tentatively scheduled to start on Friday, October 17th, with a short pause for a special student contact on Saturday, October 18th, and resume until completion on Monday, October the 20th. This interval roughly coincides with the International Scouting Jamboree on the air, and the SSTV image theme is expected to deal with scouting. ARIS expects to offer separate electronic award diplomas for participants who receive at least one image from a campaign and submit it to the SSTV gallery.
It is time for the weekly look at AMSAT's satellite shorts from all over. And once again this week, they are really short. We begin with an announcement from M2 Antenna Systems sales manager Robert Brown, KR70, who reports that LeoPack antenna systems are back in stock and once again available in the AMSAT store. Despite the factory working nearly around the clock, the LeoPack had been out of stock for several months due to a sudden increase in commercial and government orders. The good news is, at this time, there is no price increase. And finally, Suryono Adios Marta, YD0NXX/N5SNN, Amateur Radio Organization of Indonesia, reports September 28, 2025 was the 10th anniversary of IO-86, or Indonesia Oscar 86 satellite. The host vehicle, Lapan A2 satellite, was launched from India using a PSLV rocket. This celebrates 10 years of an almost problem-free satellite is beyond imagination, as the service year was designed for only 2 years. Currently, the FM voice repeater payload is still working well, only the APRS digipeater is showing reduced sensitivity. The same digipeater box, a Tracker 2 that was purchased at the same time in 2008, currently on my bench is also showing the same symptom. Hopefully we can have another 10 years of service from the satellite.
People in Florida who turn to their churches in times of need will soon find refuge there in another kind of storm, hurricane season, with the help of amateur radio. His role as the associational mission strategist for the Marian Baptist Association doesn't require Mark Wiebel and for GPA to have a ham license, but Mark, a former pastor, took his FCC test successfully a year ago, and since then he has been finding ways to harness ham radio's power for churches' emergency communications during hurricane season. The Ocala Florida Baptist Association has already added a Radio Shack and has plans for a tower. Under Mark's direction, the group is also looking to create a network of hams within its 67-member churches. Pastors are helping Mark locate licensees within their congregations. Meanwhile, the association has a telescoping radio antenna donated after an upgrade done by the Marian Emergency Radio Team, a radio group Mark belongs to which handles disaster communications and the county's Emergency Operations Center. Mark plans to give church leaders a tour of the association's Radio Shack in the hopes it will inspire them to install a shack of their own local congregations. He told the Baptist Press that church involvement makes good sense. He said, "If we were to have a hurricane, I'd need to know which churches have power, which churches are not damaged, and which churches can host disaster relief teams. I need to know which churches need help and which ones can help." Meanwhile, he is busy being helpful even without a radio in hand. His chaplaincy training assists him in helping distraught families cope during or after disasters.
6 years after launching its first nanosatellite, Sri Lanka has launched its third, and the ham radio CubeSat is now orbiting the Earth. The Birds X Dragonfly CubeSat has marked a special milestone for Sri Lanka, becoming the nation's third nanosatellite in space. Developed with the help from Arthur C. Clarke Institute for Modern Technologies and the Kyushu Institute of Technology in Japan, it began its orbit last month following its launch from SpaceX number 33. Its mission is to serve as an APRS digipeater and to test a new low-cost communication system. It will also demonstrate the relay of store and forward data. Its call sign is Juliet Golf 6 Yankee Oscar Whiskey. The APRS FM digipeater frequency is 145.825 MHz, and its CW beacon is 437.375 MHz. The 2U CubeSat project was funded by the Amateur Radio Digital Communications.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
For New Zealand's meteorologist, the Westland Rain Radar is transmitting only silence following a lightning strike of the 156 kiloamps that occurred on September 18th. A statement from Met Service New Zealand, the nation's weather service, said that the powerful surge was about 5 times greater than a typical strike and had sufficient power to run a residence for about 2 years. Various news reports said the power not only destroyed the weatherproof cover designed to protect the radar, but fried the electronics and overpowered the grounding systems at the site. The strike's destructive force had disabled the radar dome to the point that Met Service expects it to be out of service for an extended period while repairs are done. The radar is a critical forecasting tool for New Zealand's service weather warnings and plays an extremely important role for communities on the West Coast. Meteorologists, in the meantime, will be observing high-resolution computer models, satellite images, weather stations, and neighboring radar sites. According to a report on the AccuWeather website, this is not the first time the radar dome has been hit by lightning. A hit in 2022 left it with only minor damage.
On September 19, the futureGEO workshop took place under the radome of the Bochum Observatory. Organized by AMSAT DL with the support of the European Space Agency. In the spring, AMSAT DL had invited potential interested parties as part of an RFEI. The aim was to build on the experience gained with the Q100 satellite and to jointly define the first concrete mission ideas for a future amateur radio payload in geosynchronous orbit. The workshop was held as a hybrid event. The group was made up of one half who were present on the site and the other half who took part online via Zoom. Andrew Glasbrenner, K04MA, AMSAT Vice President of Operations, represented AMSAT USA at the meeting. When they discussed which communication services and experiments should the new GEO payload enable, or VR antennas, and what technical solutions are conceivable. Who should have access and how? Affordable entry into microwave communications with low-cost SDRs, development of open-source software such as DVB S2 encoders and decoders, educational projects from schools to school contacts with Antarctica. The participants also hope that radio amateurs can be more involved in the construction of the hardware of a future GEO with appropriate personal contributions, transparency, and participation. The next steps are clear. The mission ideas should be available by the end of 2025 in the form of 1 to 3 consolidated missions concepts, which are both exciting and attractive to the amateur radio community.
And finally this week, we leave you with a bit of radio history. On November 6, 1935, engineer Edwin Howard Armstrong stood before the Institute of Radio Engineers with a modestly titled paper that said, a method of reducing radio disturbance through a frequency modulation system. Behind those words was a revolution. Armstrong had invented FM radio, a way to send sound so clear it banished the crackle and hiss of AM. Music and voices emerged with a purity no one thought possible, but triumph turned to struggle. Having already given radio the regenerative circuit and superheterodyne receiver, Armstrong now faced the might of RCA and other giants who had billions sunk in AM and television. He built his own FM network between 42 and 49 megahertz, that is, until 1945 when FCC regulators, after heavy industry lobbying, forced a move to 88 through 108 megahertz, making existing equipment obsolete. Stations were limited to low power. Lawsuits multiplied, fortune and health drained away. On January 31st, 1954, at 63, Armstrong wrote a final letter to his wife, Miriam, and leapt from the 13th floor of their New York home. And yet, every time an FM signal fills the air, every static-free song or voice, we hear him. His invention outlived the corporate pressure and the silence of his final years. Edwin Howard Armstrong gave us silence between the noise and sound that endures.
Hi, I'm Terry Saunders, N1KIN, one of the anchors for This Week in Amateur Radio, and I have a few questions. Do you have a good radio voice? Do you have a quiet recording space, own a professional broadcast microphone and DAW software, and know how to use them? Can you commit to a same-day turnaround when given a script assignment? If you answered yes to all of these questions, and you're willing to volunteer your time to give a little something back to the ham radio hobby, then lend us your voice and join our anchor team for This Week in Amateur Radio. To learn more and see if you have what it takes, contact George Bowen, W2XBS, via email at w2xbs77@gmail.com or look him up on qrz.com.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeaters across the country and around the world on great repeater systems like the VK7 RDR repeater on 439.775, also on digital amateur television on 445.500 on the VK7AX H.264 AT repeater serving Ulverstone in Australia, and also via relay on the VK3 RBO DVB-T HD amateur television repeater, also on 445.500 serving Bendigo, Victoria, Australia, and also on the VK3 CE members video stream. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.